1, 2, 3.
Right, good afternoon to those of you joining us in the UK, good morning and whatever time of day it is for those elsewhere in the world. Welcome to our final presentation of 2014 and boy have we got a doozy for you all today. We've got Mitchel doing performance tuning, .NET and SQL code using ANTS Profiler, and he'll be joined by his colleague Ben. Usual stuff. Thank you very much to our brilliant sponsors, Orcsweb, Telerik, Innerworking, Syncfusion, Pluralsight, Winterlech Now, and of course Redgate, who've provided the speaker for this session, amongst many other things. From Redgate, we have a free ebook for anybody who's attending today, profiling .NET and SQL server execution plans. I can tell you from first hand that I've read this book myself. I have it sat on the shelf behind me. It's a really good book if you're doing any kind of DB work, and you absolutely need to go and grab it and go and download it. From Syncfusion, we have 5 essential studio licenses. Now this is for the full essential component suite for MVC, and it comes with a 1-year subscription to the updates and maintenance on it as well. We'll be drawing that at the end of the presentation, and 5 lucky winners will be taking one away with them. As is usual, this is how you get in touch. If you want to email us, it's info@lidnug.org. You can follow us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, or you can go to lidnug.org where there's a brief summary of what's going on. Last event for 2014, but in 2015 we have a load of great stuff coming. We'll still keep the conversations going within the group itself on the LinkedIn platform, and we've got a number of projects that we're hoping to launch early January. Stay tuned, keep following LIDNUG on Twitter and on Facebook. You'll find out all about it. Today's presenter, Mitchel, is the CEO of Iowa Computer Gurus Incorporated. He's a Microsoft C# MVP, an enthusiastic pilot, a performance tuning guru, and a conference speaker. If you've got any questions, use the Q&A tab, type your question in. Please don't raise your hand. If you put your hand up, it'll just get removed. Once your question has been answered, it'll be removed from the queue, then you'll be able to ask another one. If you need any help, look out for the members of staff in the attendees list. They will have the word LIDNUG following their name. Just right-click, go chat, reach out to one of them, and they'll do their absolute level best to help you. Attendee geography, we've got a reasonable spread. Europe, North America, we've got some down in the Philippines, China and Japan there, and South America. Wherever you are in the world, we hope you very much enjoy this final presentation. And last but not least, thank you from everybody at LIDNUG. We hope you have a really happy holiday, get safe into the new year, and continue to stay with LIDNUG for more to come next year. Have a cracking Christmas, have a brilliant new year, and now I'm going to hand over to our fabulous presenters. Take it away, guys.
All right, sorry about that. Apparently, my live meeting client and I don't want to cooperate. So, as everybody mentioned, we're talking about performance tuning with .NET and SQL code using ANTS Performance Profiler. Already talked a little bit about both Ben and myself. The one thing I want to make sure to call special attention to is please do ask your questions and things throughout this session. But if for some reason we're not able to get to your question, if it's something that's either too deep or we just get too many questions where we don't have the time to get to it, Please don't hesitate to reach out directly to Ben or myself, and we'll gladly make sure to get your question addressed or get you pointed to the right direction. I know that sometimes with these talks we get so many questions we can't get through them. It's just that if we don't get them answered as part of this session, we don't necessarily know how to get a hold of you. So here's how you can get a hold of us should you have any of those questions that you want to get answered as we move forward. So what we're going to, apparently I have this swapped around backwards, but what we're going to go through with the webinar here is I'm going to talk a little bit here in the beginning around the science and process behind performance diagnostics. Really what I want to focus on is making sure that we give you that overview of the process to be able to go through and do things effectively. Just starting out with a tool or something like that, it's not necessarily the most efficient route to get things done. So we want to talk a little bit about that. Ben's going to give you a little bit of an overview at a high level from ANTS Profiler's perspective, and then we'll switch back to me and run through a couple examples with a sample application that I have made, populated with some data and everything to walk through everything. So with that, really I want to try to keep this short, but it's something that I find a lot of times working as a consultant, working with people that are going after performance-related issues. It's all about process and procedure. If you get the processes and procedures down, it makes your life a lot easier to actually get those problems resolved and get back to what you were looking at. The first thing I like to discuss is really an overall high-level performance testing strategy. This is a slide that most people end up laughing at, but it's one of the most fundamental things that you can do in an organization to try to make your life a little bit easier. The first part and the first strategy here, and this is what I try to incorporate as much as I can in the things that I build for my clients, is a proactive performance management approach. What we're looking to do there is we're looking to really make sure that we start with performance as our first consideration. So what it means by that is that we define routines and we test the performance of our application day in and day out throughout the development process. Depending on the nature of your development, that could be something that's done once per sprint. It's something that could be done once, at each major milestone throughout a release. Exactly when and where is subject to your individual team, but the goal is to be testing and retesting on a regular basis. What that allows you to do is catch that one thing that became an outlier, that one problem that all of a sudden was introduced by a recent change. However, what we end up working with in most cases is we end up what I would call reactive performance management, which is basically everything's been done, nobody really paid a lot of attention to it, and we're going to go back and we're going to try to find those problems later. And that's what we're going to really talk about in this and working with everything with ANTS Profiler. The biggest thing, though, is it's important for everybody to remember what some of those risks are for you as a developer as you start walking down this path. The most important thing is that we don't have a mechanism to compare and validate what we see. So if we jump into something with one particular tool, one of the things that we could end up seeing is, an outlier. Oh, this looks to be a huge performance issue. It may not be. So it's very, very important to take that into consideration, that you have no baseline. You have nothing that says this is really, really bad versus something else. The other thing is and it's kind of a fundamental human nature thing, but it's also important to remember that really an emergency situation is not going to be your most effective time. You're going to be much more focused on the fact that you have management or users that are being impacted by something, and you're going to be much more focused on, I got to get this done, I got to get it done today, rather than necessarily taking a methodical approach. So to help combat some of that, we want to start out by ensuring that we set our goal for our tuning operation before we get started. So this is probably the most complex element to work with. And we want to make sure that we have a starting point. We want to know, what do we want to accomplish? And if you're working with web applications, it gets a little bit more cloudy, and that's what I kind of have included here because there's some extra things. Are we trying to focus on the perceived performance? Is it slow to the user, i.e. does it take a long time for a page to load? From a front-end perspective, are we trying to optimize performance because we are looking to make something score better with tools such as Google PageSpeed, YSlow, or some other mechanism for evaluation? Or are we doing optimization for the most critical piece, which would be because we're overloading our SQL Server? Are we overloading our IIS boxes? We need to make sure that we know exactly what our goal is to make sure that we're walking down the correct path. Once we've set our goal, we need to make sure that we set validation criteria that is going to give us something tangible to be able to say we have been successful. The key with this validation criteria, though, is not only in validating that we really did improve the performance of the area that we were working on, but it's identifying other areas that we need to validate as part of this. What else could have been changed by what we're working with? One of the things that we'll be showing in some of the demos here is a suggested index addition to a database table. We might want to make sure then that other places that are utilizing that database table aren't impacted by adding that additional index. Does it add to the insert cost of that table? Is there something else? So it's important to know your application and understand what else could be changed. If it's something method specific, what else uses that method? Make sure that if that method is used in 100 places and you're optimizing for one usage, make sure that those other areas haven't been impacted. Find all references within Visual Studio is your friend in this case, right? Find out where that code's being used. Make sure that you understand what's going on, and make sure that your test, as you're going through, tests all of those areas. Not only the problem areas, but the other areas that could be impacted, because that's what's going to make it so that your environment is stable as you go through. So what does it look like when we go to create that performance test? What do we have to look at, and what are some of the things we want to watch out for? So first and foremost, right, we need to have a consistent plan. What we do from a test script perspective, the goal here is to run a test, look at those results and identify a problem, make a change, and then rerun the test. So the most important goal of all with performance testing and tuning is to make sure that you have a consistent plan for analysis. Make sure that whatever we're doing is 100% recreatable. The other thing that we want to make sure of is that whatever we are doing as part of our application tuning operation, we want to make sure that the scenarios that we're testing are user interactions. If your users go into your application and click around wildly and perform their tasks throughout a day, and you create a performance test script that opens up your application and goes straight to the operation that's failing, that's not necessarily an apples-to-apples comparison to what they may be seeing. So make sure that it's a real, specific, recreatable, user-facing plan, something that would actually happen within your application. And the other thing that we want to take into consideration when building our test scripts is what's the desired duration of our test? How long or short do we want to make it? And I think one of the key pieces here is you want to make it as short as possible, as long as you take care of covering all of those impacted areas. The longer your performance test is running, the more clutter that you're going to have, the more areas of the application that you captured interactions from that you don't necessarily want to take into consideration. And the other thing, and we'll cover this in the demos a little bit as well, but whether or not we're looking at an application that's been running and eventually has a problem versus an application that just starts out having that problem. So you may need a couple scenarios there as well, to where as you start your performance profile, you actually let the application start, click around on a couple of things so that it's warmed up and items are cached, and then begin your real testing, or vice versa if you're looking at a different area of consideration. As we get into performance testing, we're talking today specifically about ANTS Profiler. And one of the things as a consultant that I get a lot is I deal with a lot of misconceptions around tooling, how the tools are beneficial, where they need to go, and it's important for us as people that want to be utilizing these tools within our organizations to know a little bit about how we can kind of go back and do things. You know, the number one thing I get is I get a developer that runs to a manager and says, we need product X, Y, Z, and it's going to solve all of our problems. It's not. So it's very important as we're working with these organizations that we don't utilize that as our selling point. The other thing that I get a lot with our developers that we work with training-wise is that I'm a .NET developer and I only need to worry about .NET and SQL. We're talking specifically right now about .NET and SQL with ANTS Profiler, but again, we're talking about one area. As ASP.NET developers, doesn't matter if you're web forms or MVC, you have a lot of other things to worry about. You have IIS to worry about, your HTML structure, the JavaScript that you have included, the images that go down with your application, the number of HTTP requests, etc. So again, we're creating and solving one specific area with what we're talking about today. And the most common argument that I get from managers, and this one still surprises me to this day, good developers don't need tools. I don't even really know what to say other than we want to make sure that we counteract that. So I want to just kind of cover a little bit of that just before we get into any of the demos here, making sure that we do things. The last piece that I want to cover is where do you test? Do you want to test on production? It can be done. With ANTS Profiler and other tools and things, you can profile in production. Sadly, I have profiled on production more times than I care to admit. I don't recommend that practice. The overhead of tools such as ANTS is very, very minimal to your environment, but it's disruptive to hook it up and detach it from the process. But it is going to give you the best way to test if you absolutely have to, because it's under load, etc. But what we really want to do is we want to test on a similar environment as much as we can. And when I say similar environment, I mean truly similar. The same amount of CPU, the same amount of RAM, same disk configuration, same number of servers. If you're load balanced in production, test on a load balanced environment. If you're on a separate IIS box and a separate SQL box in production, make sure that you're testing on that. Testing under similar environments is something that's not ideal. It can work, but you really have to take things into consideration. For example, the demos that we're going to go through today are all running from my local machine. The advantage to running from my local machine is that we're not transmitting the data from SQL Server to the web server over a network pipe. The disadvantage is that even when querying back 1 million records from a database, we don't get a lot of delay from that connection activity. So there's a lot of things that can go wrong. The one thing that we do recommend when it comes to dissimilar environments, if you have to go with a dissimilar environment, try to find a way to be able to scale up or down in your application. One of the things that I've found that's been successful is if you're going from a quad core down to a dual core, try to test in an environment that's a single core and then step up to a dual core environment. That sometimes will help you be able to scale a little bit and understand how to move forward. It's not an exact science, it's not perfect, but it's definitely a little bit better than just blindly testing on a different environment. So with that, we'll go ahead and move on. I'm going to turn things over to Ben and let him present a little bit of an overview and introduction to ANTS Profiler.
Hey, can you hear me okay?
Yep, loud and clear, Ben.
Awesome. Cool. Well, thanks very much for that, Mitchell. That's a great introduction. What I want to do now is just spend a few minutes introducing ANTS, and I'll just walk through a pretty basic example of how you might go around looking at the .NET code side of performance. So just to introduce myself, my name's Ben. I'm the product manager on ANTS. I've been at Redgate for about four and a bit years now. Most of that time I spent working on the performance and the memory profilers. So fundamentally, ANTS started its life as a tool to help you look at .NET code performance. So this is back in 2002-ish when it was first under development, right at the early days of the .NET platform even existing. And the primary piece of information that it was trying to give you was information about how methods call each other, how long was being spent in those methods, and then information about which lines of code took the longest. So we can pretty quickly find out the most expensive code that's running, either in terms of CPU usage or in terms of the elapsed time as a user would perceive it. In recent years, it started to look at more information for you. So it now records a lot of information about accessing things like web services or databases like SQL Server, Oracle, MySQL, Postgres, and it tries to show you that information in the context of your .NET code. So for a few years now we've been trying to augment that information about code performance with information about data access. That's recognizing that with the more data-heavy applications in the modern world, that information is really valuable. The latest release, which is what Mitch is going to spend some time shortly showing you through, tries to take things a lot deeper into SQL Server performance. So if you pick your average .NET developer, they're probably going to be working with SQL Server. Not everyone is, but a lot will be. And what this new version is trying to do is help when we see that SQL Server queries or stored procedures which are running are the ultimate cause of some kind of action being slow. So if we see a query taking, say, 10 seconds to run, ANTS is going to start trying to help you understand why it's taking that time to run. And it will do that in a few different ways, the most important of which is by showing you the execution plan for that query or stored procedure, which we're going to be able to take straight out of SQL Server's cache. So I'll leave Mitch to show you through some examples of using ANTS to try and understand the performance of SQL Server in the context of your .NET application. But I do want to do a quick overview of what ANTS is and how you might go around about using it and what you're looking for in its UI. So I'll go ahead and set up a profiling session. So you can profile different types of application. I've got a toy desktop executable that will profile, but I think Mitch is going to use an ASP.NET site. You can look at a bunch of performance metrics while you profile. I tend to recommend looking at a few things like thread count, and I usually look at memory usage at the time that we profile the application, just to give that high-level view of what's going on in the application. And then here's start profiling. So the app gets launched for you, and then in the background in ANTS, you're seeing information here about those performance counters that we chose to look at. And these give you some useful information about what's going on. So we see it's using just under 30 megabytes. You can look at, for example, the number of threads. CPU usage, particularly in the context of performance, is really important. But what we then do is we try and reproduce some kind of issue. Now, this is really easy in this toy app that I've got, because all it's going to do is load up a CSV file and display some of the data from that CSV file to the screen. But in a more complex application where you don't know what the reproduction steps are, it can become a lot more tricky. And this is where the kind of approach that Mitch talks about becomes a lot more important when you start to get into things like exploratory performance testing. So you can start to look at things like the CPU usage in the application whilst you perform certain user actions and try and identify which ones are slow before drilling down into them. As it happens right now, I know that all I need to do to recreate a pretty bad performance issue is to hit this load list of names from CSV button, which I'll go ahead and do. And you may not be able to see it over the live meeting link, but this is being pretty flickery on my screen right now. It's taken a good few seconds to load those names, which it's finally done. Now, while that was loading, while the application was running slowly, we can see the CPU usage in here, which is in red, went really high. In fact, it went way over 100%. That's because it was using a decent amount of both of the cores on this machine, so nearly maxed out both of them. And if I were to just select that time period, then this is where we start to be able to look at some detailed information about what was going on during that period of time. So I'm just going to collapse this timeline down because we don't need to see that, and I've got my resolution set pretty small for this. So what we're looking at here is how methods have called each other. So expanded out to the most expensive activity. And we read this by looking down this diagonal and trying to identify what code was taking the longest. So we can see how many times each of these methods ran. You can also then go ahead and view the source code for any of those methods. And you can see the timings and the hit counts for each of the lines in this application. You can see that almost all of the time in this period that we're looking at is spent adding controls to a table layout panel. And this is slow because after every single time that we add the control, we have to relay out this entire form, which is going to lead to really poor rendering performance. If I show all the system methods that happen in that period of time, you can see a bit more about this as well. So we can see that the time is spent here adding collections to that control. We can drill down as far as we like. But fundamentally what we're trying to do here is look at how these methods call each other, identify those that take a long time, and then understand why they're running, how they're running, and crucially, of course, what can we do that causes them to either run faster or to not have to run at all. We're looking at this time right now in terms of CPU usage. Coming back to what Mitch said about what we're optimizing for, I mean, are we optimizing for the processor time, or are we optimizing for what an end user perceives? This becomes important when we start to consider things like data access, whereby, say, accessing the file from a disk might turn out to use very little CPU resource on our machine, so it's not going to particularly hurt us in terms of overloading the IIS box, but what it might be doing is causing a long delay for a user. So as a user is loading a website, for example, we might see that takes a very long time for them. So we want to make sure that we're using the right one of these two ways of looking at time in the context of what we're trying to understand. Okay, so that was all I wanted to show. There's a lot more information that you can get in ANTS, and Mitch is going to come on to some of that in a minute, but I just wanted to give that quick overview of how you might go through setting up a profiling session and the sort of way that you interact with the app. Okay, cool. So with that, I'll just hand it back over to Mitch.
All right, can everybody hear me?
Shukan?
Perfect. All right. I like it when it actually works. All right. So what we're going to do is working with, the best way to kind of come together and create an example. Because of some of the things that we were talking about in how you do the testing, right? I didn't want a lot of clutter. I really wanted to be able to showcase basically a few bad things that should make it fairly easy for us to be able to spot and identify. More than anything, focusing on how we utilize ANTS to be able to spot things. So this example application, first of all, is definitely a little bit basic in terms of the functionality, and it's done that way on purpose. We want to focus on how you identify, as it helps everybody understand things a little bit better. First and foremost, I'll show this link here again in a few minutes, but if you want to download the sample code that I'm using here, this is a link to my GitHub repository that contains the example. You can download it. Everything is out there. The only thing that you may need to do, because I haven't found a good way to be able to share it yet, is the database that I'm using for today's demo has a large number of records added to a number of the various tables. You will need to use something to be able to create a bulk set of records. I used Redgate's SQL generator tool to take care of that, but however you want to do that is going to be good. It just is the most streamlined going on within that individual application. So what we're going to do, first of all, I'll show you guys the database structure that we're working with. Basically, it's a high-level simulated environment for a library managing books, something like that. And what we have is we have a couple tables. We have an archive table. This archive table contains information. Basically, it's just an archive of books, if you will. This table, for the purposes of the demo, I have loaded up with 1 million records so that we have it available for us to query against. Right now, as this table is created, it has a primary, it doesn't even have a primary key defined, and there's no indexes. So it's a known issue, and we'll see how we can actually identify that with ANTS Profiler here in just a little bit. Then basically we have active books, members, and then loans, which is simply a member that has borrowed a particular book. And then we have a flag in here that is used to determine whether or not that member has returned that particular book. So fairly simple database structure. The two key tables that we're going to be working with today, we have the archive table. That one has 1 million records in it. And then we have 10,749 members in the members table. So what we have in our application is a fairly simple Entity Framework 6 code first structure to map to our database. So we have our individual models here for each of our tables. Everything here is fairly standard, so I won't spend much time going into that. We have our data context. Again, nothing really out of the ordinary here. We're going to go over this piece here in just a second. And then we have, to make things a little bit easier, I have all of the individual data calls into a repository class here. Just makes life a little bit easier. So what we're going to be using for the purposes of the demo today are 3 different database calls. We have a find members routine. This find members routine is fairly simple, where it starts out just taking in a bunch of search criteria. We start out with a basic query to select out our member, and then we simply add on additional where clauses as necessary, depending on what they're looking for. So if you do it with no query, it's going to be there. This is one that's kind of an interesting one. If we want to look at only people with outstanding loans, we are using a query here to limit that down. So we'll have a little bit different query performance depending on the parameters that we work with. We also have a find archives method, which basically this is something that allows you to search that 1 million record table so that you can try to find an individual record there. One thing with the demo right now is it does allow you to try to execute this without there being any filter criteria. As it is in the checked-in version in GitHub, that will cause an out-of-memory exception, so make sure to be cautious with it. One of the things that we've also done as part of this demo, and we're going to change this as one of the things that we're going to be look at identifying is I see a lot of people that start using Entity Framework and don't understand the right ways to necessarily implement paging in their routines. So one of the things that I'll see a lot of times is somebody converts a query to list, which executes it, and then later on they decide I only want the first 10 records, or I only want the first 150. So one of the things that we have there is we'll kind of show how this works and how we can see some of that stuff inside of ANTS Profiler. And the last thing that we're going to do is a little bit more complex query example. What this is going to do is basically from the archived database table, we're going to go out and we're going to take a look at all of the books that are out there in the archives. We're going to look at only the ones where the author's first name starts with Aaron. We're going to group all of those together by author and get a count of the books by that particular person. So this is something just doing an operation against that particular table, and we'll kind of keep things simple. So with that, the web application, it's just a, like I said, very simple MVC structured application. The focus here 100% was on making it utilitarian. We don't have a lot of images and style. We can look at our master here. I'm not a designer, and it definitely shows. So with all of that, what we're going to do is we can go ahead and start things up with ANTS Profiler, and we'll just do a baseline profile of this application. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start up within ANTS Profiler. We'll do a new profiling session. And I am going to just go into the configuration here real quick just so you can see how I configured it, even though we're not going to necessarily change anything. So with ANTS Profiler and profiling ASP.NET applications, you have a number of different options available. I have found, for me anyway, working with the Web Dev Server or IIS Express, that's typically the easiest one. You can directly connect to IIS. That's where you would use to be able to connect on your local machine if you have IIS installed, if you need to do a profile in production, etc. Again, not recommended, but time will tell if you need to do that. From here, we simply point it to the path for our application. We can configure additional things if we want to within the application, what port we want to start it on, if we need a virtual directory, what the start page we want it to be, all of that we can configure if necessary. Profiling mode, I would say that 99.9% of the time that I profile, I go with line level and method level timings because that gives me everything. If you aren't really interested in all of that, you can definitely tune it down a little bit if necessary. Any additional performance counters that you may want to have, again, anything here that may be relevant to what you're trying to work with. And then the most important items here are your additional profiler options. Do you want to take care of file I/O performance? Right now, we're not doing anything with file I/O in the application, so there's no need for us to be recording it. We do want to make sure that we process all of our child processes. We do want things to be able to be inlined because we want to make sure that things are optimized as much as possible. And we do want to enable our SQL query profiling because that's going to be the most important thing of what we're doing. And then do we want to include our source code with saved results? And this is one of the most important things for me as a consultant that I cannot stress to people enough. Check that box every time you do it, because what happens is after we do our profiling session, if you have something that's just not quite making sense to you and you had that box checked, you can send me your profiler results and I'll be able to see the same thing that you were able to see. It makes everybody's life that much easier. So what we're going to do, we're going to go ahead and just start profiling. It'll take me just a second here for this to come up, and it's going to come up on my other monitor, so I'll drag it over here in a second. But one of the things I want to stress is I talked about warm process, cold process, etc. We see this spike here in ANTS Profiler right now. That was all of the overhead of ASP.NET starting with the Web Dev Server. Because we're profiling with ANTS, everything ASP.NET, you're going to profile the actual Web Dev Server itself starting up. So one of the things that I like to do when I work with this kind of profiling, start up the application, let that spike happen, and then go into starting our testing routine. So this gives me a nice bit. I now know all of that stuff over there we're going to exclude a little bit later. And now we can focus on our application. So I'll drag this window over here, 1 second. And so like I said, very simple application. Got a little bit of information just about the application, and then we have the demos page. This demos page is going to let us go in here and take a look at the various things that we can do. We'll start out by finding a member. And with this, again, it's a fairly simple process. If I want to find all of the information for members with a first name of John, you can go ahead and do our search. The first query is going to take just a little bit. We can see that we have 25 people that start with John. But I only care about John if they have an outstanding loan. So go ahead and do our search again. And we can see there's only 2 of them. But maybe I want to look at Smith. Go ahead and search. And we only have 1 that has an outstanding loan. And we can go ahead and search. We have 8 of them without that. So our application is fairly simple. Going to have some database calls that went on as part of this. If we look at ANTS Profiler as it's going, we can see some of the spikes as things were being completed. We can go back to our application, and we'll go ahead and search for an archived book. I want to look for something that was written by Adam. We'll go ahead and search our archives. So right now this is showing us 150 results, but this is doing it that longhand way. And we can take a look at that query in a second. And we'll do one more test here. Again, I want to make sure that I can keep a little bit of a distance here. Makes it a little bit easier. We can also bookmark regions as well if you need to within Profiler to be able to come back and find stuff later. We'll go ahead and summarize by author. So this is that simple query. Go ahead and close out of Chrome, and we'll go ahead and stop our profiling. And now we start to get into that overall result view. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and look at everything. Using the timeline view, you can select as much or as little of that profiling session as what you want. In my case, I'm going to go ahead and just select everything. And for the sake of view, I'm going to go ahead and collapse the timeline so that we have more room available for us. So a couple things that I like to do right out of the gate. When you open up a profiler result, the default views include percentages for time. I prefer to look at milliseconds. And in the case of this, we're looking at specific amounts of time, user perspective, queries, everything as Ben mentioned. So what I want to do is I want to actually just start out with wall clock time. This will give us the best way to look at things, quickly and easily inside of our application. So right now we're only looking at methods with source, and we're looking at that top-down view. This is one of the things for me that is really important. We can collapse and look at individual URL requests and then everything underneath it as an ASP.NET developer. So I can see here that find members had a hit count of 5. Find archived record had a hit count of 2, and then list author summaries had a hit count of 1. This allows me to quickly be able to start taking a look at things and determine what the most expensive areas may have been. For example, find archived record had 2 hit counts and had a total execution time with children of 567. This list archived had a single hit count, but it was almost the same amount of total time. One way to start looking at things and start to drill down into all of the various things that you may be looking to do in your application. We'll start out with the author summaries one, because that's one that's going to take just a second here for me to be able to actually go ahead and optimize. So what we can do is we can start to expand through and see where the most cost is. And we can see here that it took 505 milliseconds for this to execute, and 398 of those milliseconds were taken executing this query. The thing that I love with Entity Framework, one of the things that people often say is, I don't have an easy way to see what my query actually was. Well, here you go. Here's your query. What we can do with ANTS Profiler is we can make this window a little bit bigger. The best part here is this is exactly the query as it was executed. We can start and see exactly what was ran. If I want to recreate this, I can copy it. I can go into SQL, paste, and I can run the same exact query that was ran from my application. So we can see here that we have 990 rows that are returned, makes everything look really nice. But we want to be able to do a little bit more inside of ANTS Profiler. We want to know more about what's going on. So we can simply click to go into our database calls view, and this is going to let us see all of the additional information about each of those individual queries. And sorry about that. Jumped around on me a little bit here. There we go. So this was our query. And we can see here that this was the most expensive of all of our SQL queries that we had in our application. We can click on our plan here, and this is going to connect out to SQL Server, and it's going to get the execution plan from SQL Server. Now, the nice thing about this is a lot of developers don't necessarily like looking at query plans in SQL Server Management Studio. They find them very hard to understand. They find things to just be overall fairly complicated. Well, what we can see here really quickly is we can see what our expensive operations are. We can see what our overall costs are. And then we do see any of the warnings that came out of the query plan. Well, one of those is missing indexes could result in reducing query costs by 68%. Well, this is pretty simple. Wait a minute, I'm looking at the archives and I'm selecting by author. It's a fairly simple change to add a non-clustered index for author. So what we're going to go ahead and do is I'm going to go ahead and implement this change, and we'll continue looking at some of the other things while this runs, because it takes about 30 seconds for it to actually create that particular index. So what we can see here already is we know that this one query took a little bit more time than what we wanted it to. We found out that there's something that we can do to optimize it. And what we can now do is after we get this change, maybe we can go back and run another profile to see exactly what was going on. If we look at our other calls, some of our other queries are a little bit more involved. So we can see here that we had our number of member queries. So these are the individual queries for each of our individual members. And we can notice here that the query is slightly different for each one. And the nice thing about this is this allows us to see the relative query performance between our different variations and our different parameters. So we can see out here that this query, for example, was searching for John. And when we were searching for John, we were actually looking when we wanted to find out if he had any outstanding loans. That one took 22 milliseconds. We see here that when we look for a last name of Smith, again, we were looking for loans. Why was it when I was searching for Smith here, it only took 6 milliseconds? Well, we weren't searching for our loans. So what we can see is we see our similar queries but different parameters, we can start to see that things are a little bit different. And this is, again, where we can take a look at our query plan. And we see here that for this query plan as well, we have a note that we can reduce our cost by 36% by implementing a new index. So this one is, again, one that we can quickly implement. We'll bring this over here. We'll create this index as well. And we'll add this into our application. Okay. As we continue to work through, we can start to look, as you get larger applications and you get the same query running over and over again, you'll start to see a hit count increase. So if you do the same search multiple times, you'll be able to see which ones are there. Some of the key metrics and key pieces of information that you really want to look at here, though, are your total and average times Now, the important note here is the timings for SQL are time to first result. So if you have a really, really large result set and it takes time to transfer over, that's not going to necessarily be reflected here. But we can see all of this information. The other thing that we can utilize is if we know that we have a place in our code that is possibly something that is taking longer than what we think it should. I, as a developer familiar with Entity Framework, I know that what we were doing here with the find archives wasn't necessarily doing what it was supposed to do. I think that this is wrong, and I think it should be changed. We can use that to also start to identify some of the things that are going on. So what we can see here is we can look at some of the areas and identify, again, what's happening. We can see here that this looks to be a really long time, and we can look at our query and we can see that we're grabbing all matches, and then we're later on going through and sorting and limiting those. So there's a couple of things that we can do here and work on cleaning that up. And it's all about being able to understand what individual items and queries are being done. The one complaint that I get from people a lot is around potential false positives. So in this case, we have two queries here that were really expensive and they're right up there. But if we look at this query right here, that's showing as one of the fairly expensive queries, is actually part of the Entity Framework model synchronization process. So we don't really care about that. The next query down, the next most expensive one here, this one is part of the migration history for Entity Framework migrations. So one of the things that we also see people want to do a lot is to remove some of that clutter, to make our lives a little bit easier. So one of the things you can do with Entity Framework is in your data context, if you set your initializer to null, this will prevent it from doing that additional checking, which will at least remove a little bit of noise for you as you're going through and doing a profile. So what we want to do is I'm going to go ahead and save off these profiler results so that we have them and we can take a look at them a little bit later if necessary. So we'll go ahead and just save this to the desktop. Okay. And we want to keep an eye out here. We made two changes to two different areas to try to make things a little bit easier. And what we have right now is we had our author summary take 398 milliseconds. And we had our searches for members with outstanding be 22 milliseconds, and our ones without was around 6. So we can take a look at how we can make this better. So we'll go ahead and get ready to start a new profiling session here in just a second. And the only other thing that I want to do is I want to just show the relative difference in properly taking care of paging at the database level. Instead of running the query, turning it to a list, and then limiting it, we're going to simply build our query, take 150 and convert it to a list. So once that's been all built, we're good, and we'll go ahead and start profiling. Now, I want to start another profile session, and I want to do it the exact same way I did it last time. Well, guess what? It's here. It shows as my last profiling session. All of my settings are the same, so I can simply click Start Profiling. This makes it really easy. As part of that consistency, we want to make sure that we're able to be consistent in our tuning. So again, we'll go ahead and expand this a little bit. We saw the startup time impact here. That's out of the way. So now we can go through and start our test scenarios again. Go ahead and go into the demos. Go ahead and go find a member. we'll go ahead and start out here. We'll look for John. Find 25. We'll look for John with an outstanding. We'll find our 2. We'll go ahead and look at Smith with outstanding. Find 1. And Smith without. Even without looking at Profiler, it's a little bit more responsive this time. We'll also go ahead and go back to our demos. Go ahead and find an archived book. We'll find archived books by Adam, and look at that, instantly comes back. Much, much faster than what we had last time. And the last thing we'll do is we'll go ahead and look at the summaries by author. You notice that came back really fast. Didn't even flicker. I don't even think it flickered here in LIDNUG. So what we're going to do, go ahead and come back and we'll stop. First glance, one of the things that we can tell between the run, our prior run, and this run is we don't have huge spikes in CPU usage. The biggest spikes that we have in CPU usage now are under 50%. So what we can do is start out like we did last time, change our view to milliseconds, change to wall clock time, and minimize our tree view. And we're just going to go ahead and go straight into our database calls. Now, right there, we've got a fairly big change from what we had before. This query here is the one to grab a particular, to search for a particular author. So this is the one where we're looking for Adam. We're at 46 milliseconds. But the one that was taking forever, that author summary, here's our author summary, that big long query. This was taking 398 milliseconds the last time. It's now taking 4 milliseconds to do the same query. And that was by simply adding 1 index. We can look at the query plan now. We can still see that there is some cost associated with everything, but it's to be expected because we have a lot of things going on in that query. So utilizing this, we're able to confirm that we made things better. We want to look for, does anything take longer? Well, the only thing we can see here is it does look like our search for John and our search for Smith that was looking, just looking at them took a little bit of time. Not a big deal here within this individual query process. So again, we can see how we can look at optimizing. We can look at ways to make things a little bit easier and quickly identify where things are going. From a navigation perspective, the only other thing that's really important from a switching between your various views is we do have this .NET option, and this will take you right back to where in the .NET call tree you actually executed that individual call. So with that, do we have any questions that we have out there at the moment? Or Ben, anything that you would like to add about how the SQL process works and running through some of the items that are out there?
Can you hear me again? Hopefully.
Yep.
Cool. So there was one question that came in to me by email, which was, can ANTS rerun the query as well for you? Which I can answer. So ANTS isn't going to rerun that query for you directly. What it is going to do is it's going to give you what you need to be able to rerun it. So actually, Mitch, if you're able to switch across to the database calls view.
Yep. I can do that.
As you have the screen.
Okay.
So if you select one of the, say where it says p-link 0 equals Adam.
Yep.
The row just below that one.
Oh, there we go.
So what it is going to do is it will format the information for you such that you can rerun it yourself. Generally speaking, we think it's probably a bad idea for ANTS to go ahead and rerun things against your database server for you, because we don't really know what this query does. So for all we know, this could say delete from important table, and then bad things would happen. What we do is we've got the values of any parameters that are used in in running a query, and so we will format them for you. You can see just at the top there that the value of that plink 0 parameter is formatted such that it is declared, and then the statement is printed out so that you can hit F5 and that will run. So you can debug this in SNS. I mean, now if you are using Entity Framework, then perhaps you'll want to be tweaking the code used by Entity, so the code that you've written for Entity Framework rather than the query itself. But if you've got specific queries that you've handwritten, then this is probably a really good place to do that. Just while we wait to see if there are any other questions, I want to just show...
Can I just interrupt there a second?
Oh, sorry, yes.
You've got 3 questions in the Q&A.
Oh, we have got 3 questions. Okay.
Click on Manage.
Button. So Manage. Okay, cool. I will come to them in 2 seconds. I would just like to put up this slide whilst we answer them, which is to just share an ebook. So if you do want to learn a bit more about how execution plans work, there's a great ebook which is written by a guy called Grant Ritchie, who, what he doesn't know about execution plans and SQL query tuning probably isn't worth knowing. So you can get that for free using that link there. You can get a free trial of ANTS Performance Profiler, and also to say thanks for watching this webinar. If you would like to get 25% off any purchases, you can do that using the code there. So there are 4 questions now. So let me come back to this. So first question from Tom Morgan: does it work just as well with MVC ASP.NET? Yes, is the that's a nice easy one. Cool. Yeah, so it works equally well with MVC and web forms. So you see the same information about how an incoming request against a URL has caused activity to happen in the code. I've forgotten what button I had. I think I pressed the tick box and then it goes away. Okay, next question.
Just tick them to let us know that you've done them, we'll clear them.
Okay, my bad. From Robert Johnson: is there a way to compare results from 2 sessions? That would make it easier to spot improvements in larger sessions. You can't directly compare them, so it won't. ANTS won't automatically compare the results from 2 separate profiling sessions for you. What you can do, which I think people do a lot, is you can run 2 sessions side by side happily. So you can have a set of profiling results on, say, one screen and a set of profiling results on the other screen. And because what you are shown by default is the most expensive activity anyway, it makes it pretty easy to run that kind of comparison yourself, particularly because you will tend to know what you're looking for. So you're going to have made some kind of optimization which you think is aimed at solving a particular problem. So you tend to be looking for that one specific thing in the second set of results. So typically, that's how I've seen people handle that. Okay, so that was Robert Johnson's question. Does Entity Framework initialization of big contexts have an impact on profiling? Can I see variables being executed?
I can take that one, Ben, if you want.
Okay, yeah, great.
Yeah, the larger the context, yes. And there's really 2 routes that I've seen with it. To answer the second part of the question, yes, any and all variables that were utilized by Entity Framework to do the initialization of the context, etc., everything is there, and you'll see it. there's two routes that I normally see people go when they're really trying to tune and don't want to necessarily tune anything that's ASP.NET Entity Framework overhead. One would be to do, as I showed in the example, to set the initializer to null so that it's not actually doing all of that initialization, making sure there's no migrations to run, etc. The secondary option is to provide a starting point in your application that triggers a database call. So, for example, have a performance start ASPX page or something of that nature, and have that execute a query so that the context is fully initialized and it executes a query, and then you can start your testing afterwards. That's just another method to be able to try to mitigate a little bit of that impact. More than anything, it gives you that separation. Just like as I start an application and I wait for the overhead of the web server starting to get out of the way, you can basically do that same thing with your Entity Framework context initialization by starting it right away at the beginning of your application so then you can move forward.
Cool. I don't think I understand this question. Can ANTS record or replay the keystrokes between test sessions? If not, can you recommend a keystroke recorder? I don't think I understand that. So can I, that was from Mike Lilek. Can I ask you to provide some more details about that, please?
Can I interject there, guys? I think I've got a rough idea what Mike might be asking.
Okay.
You know, when you automate your test sessions, sort of using what they call it? There's like things that automate the mouse and the key presses and that, or when you're doing a headless browser session with things like Phantom.js.
Okay, sure.
Yeah, I think that's what he might be referring to.
Okay, that makes sense then. So ANTS won't do that kind of replay, and I guess, yeah, if you mean things like the sort of thing that Selenium does, then ANTS won't do that. What you can do is you can start ANTS without the browser. So we showed, or Mitch rather showed, starting the application and then ANTS launching Chrome for you. That just happens to be a convenient way of you driving the application. There's nothing to stop you launching a separate browser or launching a headless or running load tests or whatever you want against the application. But ANTS isn't going to do anything to specifically record and replay those keystrokes on your behalf. Probably the best bet there is to use a separate tool. I personally would suggest Selenium, but Phantom.js as well is a good option. Cool. Can I test with any DB server or only MS SQL? So the answer depends, basically. The only database server that you're going to get execution plans for is SQL Server. So Oracle databases have a similar sort of concept that is a little bit like SQL Server execution plans, and that's not something you'll see in ANTS. What you will see in ANTS, though, is the database requests that are made against Oracle databases or Postgres or MySQL or, well, I guess MariaDB if you use that. So you'll be able to see those queries. You'll be able to grab the statement text or the name of a stored procedure. You'll be able to copy and paste that, but you're not going to be able to click a button and be able to see the execution plan. Mitch.
Yeah, I was just going to say, for that one, I would say if you, the person asking that one, if you want to send me an email, that's one I think we can take offline. There's a few things that you can do, but it's a fairly long and convoluted process to discuss. So I would like to defer that one if we can.
Cool. So that was the question from
yeah, and actually I'll take this next one from Brian. So Brian, yes, you can use ANTS to measure the performance of something when you do with an automated stress testing service. I actually do this quite a bit. So what you end up doing, and this is specific like for an ASP.NET app where you're using something like Loader.io, LoadStorm, you name it. What we do is we install ANTS on the server that we're running that test from. And basically what you do is you start a new profiling session with ANTS Profiler and you hook it into IIS. That injects ANTS Profiler into the middle of the execution process. Now, the only word of warning that I have with that is depending on how large of a load you're running, if you do log everything at the highest level of detail, you could very well generate a ridiculously large ANTS Profiler result file. I accidentally ran it once against a load that was higher than expected and generated a 32 gig results file in about 10 minutes. That did not necessarily net as much as I wanted it to. Funnily enough, it actually did still find the performance problem. So you definitely can do that. It's just something you have to coordinate a little bit. But it's profiling.net, so it doesn't matter where that traffic load is coming from. It's all a matter of what server you're actually running it against and what its bindings are at the time of performance tuning.
Cool. The last question from Falak is, can we do data comparison between Oracle table and SQL table using SQL compare? Oh, okay, so using SQL compare. So this is a different tool. I don't think that that is possible. That's not a tool that I work on, so I don't know the answer to that question, I'm afraid. If you want to get in touch with our support team, that's probably the best place to go about whether that's a feature that's supported. So I think that is the last of the questions. I'll just stall for another 30 seconds to see if any other questions come in. If they don't know, then just a reminder that you've got these couple of things here. So you've got this book on execution plans. You've got a discount on this on any new license purchases if you'd like to. And then finally, here are the contact details for me and Mitchell if you do want to get in touch. We're also going to start a discussion board on the LIDNUG user group, so we're going to hang out there, and if you do have any questions or you want to chat a bit more, then it'd be great to get that going on LIDNUG directly. I think that'll work out well. There aren't any more questions, so before passing back to Shorter, I just want to say massive thanks to Mitchell for hosting this. Hey, I've learned a bunch of stuff doing it, so that's been really cool. And huge thanks as well to all the guys at LIDNUG who've been awesome at getting this going. So, thanks for having us along.
No problem, guys. Great session. Thanks very much. I've never actually dug into ANTS, to be perfectly honest with you, and I do quite like what I see. It's a really powerful tool, so I think I'm going to have a good look at it myself, probably. We do actually have a couple more giveaways, as well as everything that Redgate's provided for us, the free ebook and the 25% discount and that. We actually have 5 licenses to give away for Syncfusion Essential Studio as well. So if you two guys would like to hang around and announce a couple of names, yeah?
Sure, yeah. I mean, Also, very happy to give away a license of our .NET Developer Bundle, which includes ANTS Performance Profiler that you've seen here, as well as our Memory Profiling tool. So we'll choose a name for that as well.
Fantastic, fantastic. Right, so winners list is in the handout, apparently. Brian, help. I'm not used to, oh, there it is, it's okay, I have a text file here. Good, good. Right. So, when my mouse decides it's going to work again, there we are. Right. So, congratulations to the 5 winners who we've already drawn out. And I'll give one name to Mitch via your chat window there. And I'll give another name to my colleague Gavin via his window there. And I will give another name to Dan, because believe it or not, there's actually quite a few of us here. So there is the name for Dan to call out in his chat window. And Brian and I will do numbers 5 and 6. So take it away, guys. If you 3 want to call those 3 winners' names out now and give them congratulations.
Alrighty, I'll go first. John Parker, congratulations.
And then Gavin, if you're there.
Hello, congratulations to John Jubila.
And then Dan.
Congratulations to Parna Perumalsami. Hope I got that right.
Yeah. And congratulations to Debbie Marie for being our 4th winner. And finally to Brian.
And Dan Matatek, congratulations, mate.
Hope you all enjoy the free 1-year support license from Syncfusion. It's a great tool set and it's absolutely fantastic for MVC projects. I think if we've got no more questions for our presenters, we'll just wrap things there. Have a really stonking Christmas, happy holiday season and a great new year. Happy holidays from me. Brian, Gavin, Dan, if you want to say anything, feel free to do so, guys.
Yeah, just a moment. We just had an announcement just earlier from, I think Ben mentioned that they were giving away a license to a winner from Redgate.
Oh, right, okay. I didn't catch that one.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. So it was that if you've got a last name on a, I don't know how you take a list of the winners. So if you got one more name, then that person can have a copy of the ANTS Performance Profiler that we've just seen, as well as the Memory Profiler.
Well, if you have a look in your chat window, Ben, I'll just give you the name there.
So that's for Mitch Nell. So yeah, congratulations, Mitch.
If you contact Ben or Mitchel Sellers or Redgate, and I'm sure they'll organise getting that prize to you if you haven't already got any paperwork for it.
That's right, yeah. Just drop me an email at the address that you've got on the screen right there, and I'll sort that out for you, Mitch.
Fantastic. Well, it's been a great year. We've had many great presentations. We hope to have more in 2015.
So, Peter, how many? What is our membership at now? Like 52,000?
Our membership now is at 51,623.
Wow.
Last time I looked, anyway. We broke the 50,000 barrier. I think it was round about September. and we've continued to climb slowly but surely since then. So I think we've certainly got a lot of life left ahead of us.
Yeah, it's about between 50 and 100 additional members a week at the moment, I think.
Yep, something like that. And we'll let Gavin mention here as well that we have a new toy coming in January, hopefully, don't we, Gavin?
Yeah, we certainly do. We have the Windows 8 app, Universal app's nearly finished.
So sorry, go on.
No, carry on.
And that'll go out. That'll be available through the Windows Store, hopefully, for those LIDNUG members who want to load it onto the tablets. So,
Yes, definitely.
once again, happy holidays. Have a great new year, and we'll see you all in 2015.
That's great stuff.
Thanks so much, everyone. Cheers, guys.
Yeah, thank you guys.